Good morning, good afternoon, good
Good morning.
evening, depending on where you
Well,
are
not
on
us
this fast
here.
forward planet, which is still wrapped in a pandemic, which is a human heated planet, which is a planet disrupted by conflict because of the continuing aggression of Vladimir Putin in Ukraine. It's a planet facing profound challenges as we surge toward 9 billion people, trying to fit all of our aspirations and activities onto this finite space called Earth. We're defending it on Monday for the first time. NASA's striking an asteroid with the DART mission is going to test the idea of deflecting an asteroid so that someday a peril from outer space will not ruin our lives by causing a massive tsunami and climate change and mass extinction. That would be a nice thing. But even as NASA's got the capacity to do that, NASA's capacity to show us the change on this planet sometimes seems to be falling on deaf ears. So today I've got two people on an incredible journey. Or in both their careers and in their now in their in a sorry, hold on a second. In a physical journey across the biggest sea on the planet, they're trying to test ways to live more sustainably. Rob and Bell, I've just silenced their end. I've got a train on my end. I'll explain the context in a second. And they're on a boat in Bora Bora, French Polynesia. And that train is getting really loud. I can't believe it. Ellsworth, Maine has a train. At any rate, they are crossing the Pacific Ocean en route to Tasmania. Uh, uh, it's Robin Bell and Karl Copeland, a longtime married couple who live in the Hudson Valley near where I used to live, and who are really devoted to, as Karl wrote in a book, live sustainably now. He's been trying to demonstrate through practice, whether it's through bicycling or sailing, long distance sailing, that we can do the things we need to do, generate as much energy as we can locally and the like. But I thought it'd be great to catch up with them. They have good internet where they are right now in uh, French Polynesia, Polynésie Française, where I got to spend some time as a young man, as a kid, really, when I was 21, 22, getting out of college. And I was studying man's relationship to the sea and spent time with a family there on part of a bigger journey. So I'm going to unmute them and I'm going to mute myself so you don't hear the train. There's never trains I live now in Maine, not too far from this town, Ellsworth. I'm at the hospital because my wife tripped while we were hiking this morning. She's in good care in the ER, and but I couldn't pass up the chance to connect here. So I'm going to unmute you guys. Hold on. Oh, Karl, can you unmute on your end? Maybe for some reason I thought. See if you can unmute it. If not, I'll try again. I don't know why it's not letting me unmute you. Unmute mic. Unmute mic. Hold on. Karl, I think you have to do it. Try one more time. There's a little unmute button. If not, oh, there we go. Yep, you're good. You're good.
Okay.
All
Good.
set.
All right. Good.
So there's a lot to unpack here.
Yeah.
I'm
By the
sure.
way, you remember any Polynesian?
Yorana, a few words, but
Yorana?
not enough. So just explain. Let's a thumbnail sketch of both of you. Robin Bell, climate and polar scientist. But tell us a tiny bit more about what pulls you through the day. What do you think about? What are you working on? And then we'll get to the journey.
Right now, I'm working on Karl with getting us safely around the world with a stop in Tasmania, where I have Fulbright. And, we spent a lot of time looking at the landscape and thinking about the people in the places we've been, the ocean we're crossing.
I think you're being a little too modest about the things you're working on right now, too. So,
Yeah.
Rob got a grant funded, right, to help
Anti-racism in geoscience.
Anti-racism in geoscience, and kind of helping young scientists from underrepresented communities and underrepresented groups. it's armoring is the term you use,
Right,
right? To
right.
kind of, focus on what brought them into science as a way of helping them deal with some of the challenges that are there. So Robin's still actively involved in that. And did you ask about me?
No, you were
Yeah.
supposed
Oh
to.
yeah. Maybe I should have each of you introduce the other. How about that?
Oh, that would have been a.
But I as you know, I taught environmental law at Pace Law School. I lived at Powell School of Law at Pace Litigation, representing Riverkeeper and other environmental organizations protecting the Hudson River and the Hudson River Valley, using and training students that way. So I've been working on, kind of how law and policy and the environment and people, right, who interact for a long time. And of course, you can't do that with becoming more and more aware of the biggest environmental challenge we have. And just kind of also the disconnect between a lot of what people put their energies into on environmental issues and the biggest environmental issue we face. And once you see the connection between everything you do in life and fossil fuel emissions and energy use, you can't unsee that, right? And it's
Right.
in a different scale and with a different set of actors, the same problem, all environmental law problems, which is, it's what we call the death of a thousand cuts. One usually is the one that is responsible for all the pollution, and any one polluter could probably get away with it without actually causing much harm, but it's the combination of everybody acting together. Anyway, I could go on for a long time, but that got me thinking a lot about sustainability and how it relates both to policy, politics, and individual action, right? And how we live our lives. And that led to writing my book too. And sailing around the world with dream since I was about 12 years old. So I can't say it came right out of that, but it is a way to see a lot of the places I've chosen not to fly to in my life, and see them all on one trip instead of 1,000 little trips.
Amazing. And you maybe explain, you also have crossed the Atlantic at least a couple of times that I know of, right?
That's right. We did 2 round trips. So I had both associated with academic sabbaticals on my part. So in 2006 to 2007, we sailed, and we had our children with us actually on the way across, which was really great. And our daughter stayed with us in Barcelona for the school year, most of it. And then we sailed back in the spring of 2007. And then again in 2014 and 2015, we sailed the boat across Galicia and Portugal, where I actually managed to attend a waterkeeper conference, environmental advocates, organized by our Han Bay keeper, Mabake Sek. And he wanted somebody to come and talk about U.S. water protection law. So it was really cool to be able to sail there and participate in that conference. And then perfect timing to sail from there across the Atlantic to the Caribbean and then back home.
Yeah. Now, people forget the Atlantic is kind of a pond compared to the Pacific. So were you nervous when you headed out?
Well, I think that the getting out of New York was the first challenge. It was like threading that needle between spring storms and the first hurricane. Now that you're in the wind.
It's funny but also, like the Atlantic is so small now that we see the Pacific, but the Atlantic is still a ocean, right? As the people in Nova Scotia and Maine are experiencing right now.
Yeah, I just wrote about that this morning.
And the thing about our Pacific crossing so far, at least, we're about to cross that line where we go back to a place where there's actual weather. I mean, in the wind zone, there's no change in the weather. It's the same every day. It's the same 15 to 20 knots, a couple of showers, and you kind of forget about having to worry about bigger wind or a calm day, changing wind. And it's funny, I read Herman Melville's Typee as a way to just get read some other experience with the Marquesas. And that's one of the things that Melville actually talks about too, is that the the Marquesans really don't have weather. They don't even think about it because it's the same weather every single day, and it's wonderful weather. It is not too hot. It's nice, pleasantly warm, maybe a little hot during the day, and it always cools down at night.
Yeah, I'm showing on Google Maps right now, Google Earth, where French Polynesia is in context of Nukuhiva, Tahuata, and the rest. I experienced that weather when I was there in French Polynesia for several months, and I was in the Tumotus, where I think you also stopped.
Yeah, we stopped.
And I was in a little tent. I was kind of on my own for a while, and this wind started that just kept coming day after day after day. It was on a scale of weather that felt really different, meaning a system that just built and built. There was a French destroyer or something that came into the lagoon and rode out this storm for a while, and just the sounds and the scale of things was really mind-boggling. Have you had any misadventures so far? We as journalists, we focus on the tough times, or has it been pretty smooth sailing, literally?
It's been pretty smooth sailing.
The most exciting thing is when we mess around with the spinnaker pole, which is this, how long is it? 15-foot piece of metal that Karl the bow with, and he now wears a. That's the car, but I think other than that.
So yeah, we didn't break the fitting that. But you expect, on a triple, you expect stuff to break, and we're lucky that nothing catastrophic, or kind of, or that would end the trip has broken, right? Or even delay us a lot.
It's kind of like driving the car across the country twice already, two or three times. So you'd expect something to go wrong in a car you drove across the country a couple times. But when we were thinking about what was the scariest thing, I still think it's when you go on land. And for my birthday, Karl in Jamaica treated me to a trip to a Rasta boutique little coffee place, and the taxi driver was drunk on a skinny road, and oh my God, that was terrifying.
Oh my God.
As usual, it's often land that's scarier than the ocean.
Wow.
The ocean is what it is,
and we're, and it's some part of it is luck, and part of it is planning, and so the worst, the worst weather we had was like the second day out of New York, crossing the Gulf Stream, and we had a front come through, just at the north wall of the Gulf Stream, and then we just, we were kind of planning for it. We knew it was coming, and we shortened sail, reefed the sail, and waited for the front to pass before we actually went into the Gulf Stream. Again, I don't want to minimize the dangers and the terrifying power of the ocean, right? Because it's out there. And as I said, it's kind of, since we left the Gulf Stream, we've kind of been parts of the ocean where there isn't any severe weather, really. Wind and the 20 knots of wind and the trade winds, it's certainly a cap full of wind, as they say, but it's not dangerous weather, right? It's just short sail a little bit and keep going. Now, so we're a little bit apprehensive about the next phase of the trip as we work our way towards New Zealand, and there have been some big storms that have sunk boats between Tonga and New Zealand in the past. Queen's birthday about 20 years ago is one everybody remembers.
Yeah, I almost wrote a book about the Tasmanian, the race where that was so disastrous.
The
Hobart race, which was another famous yachting disaster.
I learned that good. We've run into Australians who say that part of that is because you sail on a schedule, not when the weather's right.
Yeah.
And that's full of people who sailing isn't always their first priority.
Right. Weekends, he described it. This Australian sailor. Yeah, they're all a bunch of weekend, yahoos who enter the race and then have no idea. So who knows? But we part of the trick is to leave lots of time and try to avoid a schedule so that you can pick your weather. And so far, knock on wood.
Yeah, that this issue of time, I think time is so critical in thinking about the sustainability question, because
Yeah.
a lot of our urges as a
Yeah.
species are for more of something, or to do it more efficiently, or to get someplace quicker. Way over a decade ago, I wrote about one of the early efforts to get some sail power on cargo vessels. It was uh, a ship called the Beluga that had big kite sails. And I just went to the company's website, and it's no they the kite sail business is still going, but they don't do them for shipping yet anymore. Although now I may be doing a story soon about some new small scale, long haul shippers that are going to use sail power.
Uh-huh.
But again, this is butting up against what's just in time delivery. I remember in the 1970s, it grew out of Japan, the efficiency race. There was this idea of just in time delivery, and then containerized shipping, and our flying mania. There's supersonic jets are going to be made again. They're poised to have a successor to the Concorde, which I wrote about recently, because I thought the Concorde illustrated to me, the end of the Concorde in 2003 illustrated to me, well, maybe we do have limits. Maybe people are recognizing we don't have to get to Europe in 3 hours. But it looks like that's going to happen again. So it feels like a constant kind of a struggle.
Yeah, and the challenge of changing the way we think about energy use and fossil fuel use is such a huge challenge because of that human urge. But maybe we can learn to think about time differently. I think of it as, people look at me right now, and I'm always afraid people are going to say, "Well, what are you doing? You're on like a 2-year vacation. Why are you doing that?" Right? And the way I look at it is, these are places I chose not to fly to all my life, right? And instead of making 20 airplane trips, I'm just making one big trip. And yes, this takes a lot of time, but it's time that I didn't spend somewhere else, right? And of course, you could also look at, well, what do people do with all their time they're saving and not flying, right? Well,
I muted myself. Sorry.
okay.
So Gurno Wagner, who's just joined the faculty at Columbia, the business school, an environmental economist, climate economist, he's constantly demonstrating things he's done in his life, to even in a New York City apartment, to cut their energy use and stuff. What's been the reception so far? Do you feel this is a groundswell, or still kind of a microcosm that's, there's this big electrify everything push, which I just did a session about.
Yeah. I don't think it's a groundswell yet. I was hoping that by now it would be, but it's getting to be. I don't know what's kind of a prelude to a groundswell. It's maybe hope that's a groundswell. I mean, I think things even like the gas price shock of the last year, because part of the problem is you got to get people who do not see climate as the number one issue of their life interested, right? And engaged too, right? And so it's hard enough getting people who might check off the box climate number one, about how their own own choices in life affect climate. But with electric cars, that take off, because people probably people would be perfectly happy not to have to go to the gas station anymore, right?
Sure. And the
And
maintenance, just the maintenance issue alone, they're
the maintenance, and it actually, electric cars save you time, right?
right.
So that's one. And heat pumps, I think when people kind of realize how great they are, I think that's another thing which could really take off. But of course, we have to make all the electricity for it too.
Right.
So I think that there's some potential there, but I don't think it's a groundswell yet. I don't know if you've seen anything like a groundswell.
No, I think you're right. I think this is a stage where, well, those of us who've been at this for a very long time feel it would be great if this had all happened 20 or 30 years ago. I think the thing I think about every day now is what tools I have, or we have in communication, particularly, that can help normalize or build that landscape of opportunity around clean energy, around energy conservation, around working remotely instead of traveling if you can. Obviously, a carpenter can't do that. Or thinking about the materials that you use. Here in the University of Maine has a big program underway on timber technology that there's lots of uses for cellulose from trees that can clearly supplant some of the, not just plastics, but even structural materials that require a lot of energy. The sooner we have a feeling of, I guess the big shift I see is a shift from an activism for stopping things, no fracking, no this, no that, to an activism of yes.
Well, isn't that the painting the positive picture of the future? And this is, something I always come to is that, and it came from worrying about sea level, is that if I just told people that my work on the ice sheets I was going to drown.
Right.
I used to do these demos where I could show you how much of a house I would drown with West Antarctica or Greenland, or use it on the Tappan Zee Bridge, and just seeing the terror on a little boy's face one day. It's like, I'm not doing that anymore. That's not the way. That's not the way to get us to a future we want to share. What we have to do that it's real, but we also that we are making changes in our life for that.
Yeah.
So,
and this relates to universities too. I'm really liking what the climate school is trying to do in integrating design, integrating the arts and humanities into thinking about climate and energy in ways that, to me, the more we look at, let me just back up a little bit. If we know sea levels are rising for centuries to come, we know even with a perfect carbon plan, it's about slowing that. It's not about stopping it. That leads, you could say, oh my God, or you could say, hey, that's a cool problem. How do we live with a coastline that's always going to be changing? To me, that
right.
flips the script. And, essentially through this century, in so many ways, we live in an environment that's full of layers of change that are accelerating because of some things that happened 100 years ago and some things that are happening now. And having it be less about stopping things and more about navigating, sort of like on a boat, feels to me more productive.
And it's something, as a geologist, we're used to seeing things, I'm always like asking the question, how old is the mountain behind me, which is about 3 million.
Right.
And that gives you this perspective that the planet's not static. And that's one of these things we've seen on this trip, is how different age islands are. And we as humans are fortunate because we have that knowledge. We can see how things change over time. And it's the question of how we see we're going to fit into the change that we've made. As with the knowledge we're very lucky as a species to have, and be able to recognize the change. And will we be able to tell whether it's the things that Gunter is putting on in doing in his apartment, or the things people are doing along the coast here?
Yeah. You're just thinking about, there are options. There are pathways that there's this thing I hadn't really heard about until I started talking to a lot of scholars, called path dependency, which is basically momentum. We build these structures that some of them are administrative, some of them are political, some of them are infrastructure, that are really hard to kind of unravel. And even your work on diversity and inclusion faces the same challenge as all the sustainability questions to me. We are in a structure. We can't just rip it apart immediately. How do we work with that? So do you feel that this is often talking about this feels mushy, right? Like, so what's the action list? But do you have a way to sort of distill a problem that encourages people to think about it in a new way?
Well, there's so many. Again, it's such a multi-layered problem, but because I do focus a whole lot on individual consciousness raising, I really think you talk about a groundswell, effective political climate. right? More than just kind of the incremental steps that we've taken so far, and even the IRA, like incremental, steps, not going to get there. So there's a groundswell of people integrating climate thinking into their life, right? And to me, I know the whole concept of like carbon footprint has been kind of tarred as just some plot by British Petroleum to make us, I don't know, buy more gas, which doesn't make any sense. But I think actually just getting people to be aware of how their own contribution to climate change, right? What part of it is from driving to work? What part of it is from getting on a plane? What part of it is from heating their house? And what part of it is, built into the food they eat and to the goods they consume? Once you're aware of that, even if it doesn't result in immediate action, it just changes your feeling about all of these things you choose to do. So I think that's a really important step, is to go to one of the good carbon calculators, and really take, look in the mirror, right?
Yeah.
And see what choices, what things you're doing in life actually matter in terms of their climate impact, and matter both, individually and collectively. And to me, I find it very satisfying. Part of, you hear people talk about the kind of being overwhelmed and kind of a climate anxiety and this feeling of this huge problem that nobody can do anything about. And it's a coping mechanism too, right? When you take action in your own life, you are doing something about it, right? And you're actually doing something almost impacts climate, is incremental. Every bit of emissions counts. And measurable change in emissions, right? You can measure how much you're reducing your own impact by tons per year, right? So I think that's an important first step, is just kind of consciousness raising about how different things we do contribute to the problem.
And my approach is I always try and, wherever I'm talking, I try and share what the evidence or where the change is in the community I'm talking to. At home, I talk about how my daffodils come up sooner and how I can harvest tomatoes longer from the backyard. And then, or if I'm talking about sea level, I talk about how it's changing the community I'm in, to try and personalize it so people understand that they can see it in their own lives. And then I talk about what I'm doing, and what, similar, you'll be shocked to hear, to what Karl talks about, that I say that as a scientist, I take this seriously. And the pandemic has been a huge plus for us to be able to do much more work remotely, and be able to attend international meetings without having to fly around the world. So it's again, looking for those opportunities to do something now. And the other message I try and convey is that we all have levers we can pull. We can pull the one that's the individual lever. We can pull the one that's our institution where we work and live. How can we make sure that they are being climate responsible? And we can connect with the governments that we are part of. So we all have tools in front of them. And the question is, when we walk into the tool shed, are we going to pick up the tools and start using them?
Yeah, no, I think you're onto this critical point. And to me, there's a couple of questions have come in, which I'll say in a minute. But to me, a key part of this also is sharing what you're learning. The downside of social media is clear, but there's huge potential to connect with people, and not just on social media. There in San Francisco, on the resilience side, there are these community vulnerability assessments that were done like a festival. Get the block together, So in your city block, who's the old person who doesn't have air conditioning, and how do you maybe you could solve that with a heat pump air conditioner, which I think actually is what Gurno has in his apartment downtown. So the question came in here though. I'm having a little hard time seeing my screen because it's so bright outside. How can the average person know their carbon footprint? What are some of these calculators that you were talking about, Karl?
So the Berkeley Cool Climate Calculator, if you just Google it, it's the most comprehensive and thorough one. I don't have the website offhand, but I think you just Google Cool Climate Berkeley.
Yeah, good.
It comes right up, and that is the most thorough, and it it also gives you a comparison of how big is your house, and then figures out what your heating bill is. The best one to say, take a look at your heating bill, figure out how much you spent on natural gas for heating or oil for heating or electricity, and what's your electricity provider and things like that, so that you get a look at your own actual energy use, not just a kind of a generic substitute. So that's a good one, and that one, it ends up being very good. It does do a kind of a, make some assumptions about consumption patterns. So it basically says, how much do you spend on clothing or whatever, and it turns that into a carbon footprint of your purchases, which is a useful one. And I got it up on the thing already.
Yep.
So
We haven't mentioned changing your electricity, right?
well, right, there's little things, easy things to do, which is to change your electricity provider to a renewable energy. And again, these are incremental, but they changes the economics for developing renewable energy, and it's a really good thing.
So
And
someone is sorry.
Talking about it is so important, right?
Yeah.
Because actions we take as individuals are small in the global context, but you leverage them by saying, hey, I did this because I care a lot about climate, right?
Right.
And we're awkward conversations, right? It's one thing, social media is great to talk to a lot of people who generally agree with you, right?
Right.
Bringing it up, and it's, look, we can decry the polarization in our society and everything, but it is when we no longer talk to people, we have different viewpoints. And it's funny, when I started doing personal actions, and I'm not going to fly, and I would tell people, I'm not flying on a vacation this year. I'm not going to go to that, short meeting, because I just can't justify the carbon impacts of doing it. You get interesting reactions, right?
Yeah.
I very often would get a more negative environmentalist friends of mine, because they take it as an implicit criticism of continued flying, and maybe even what felt like more respect from some of my acquaintances, not an issue at all, right?
Yeah.
And who might even vote Republican most of the time, right? Who just see it as a principled position, right?
Right.
And so interesting, and people do get defensive very quickly, and it's a real challenge. You're doing work in climate communications. It's a real challenge to figure out how to communicate the urgency and your own personal sense of urgency without putting people on the defensive, right?
Yeah.
But we have a way to do it.
Yeah, I think just testing different approaches is really important. There's another person at Columbia who's done a lot of work on how to have those difficult conversations. It's Peter Coleman, who founded the Difficult Conversations Laboratory. Growing out of deep ingrained conflicts in the Middle East and the like, that those techniques are there. I've seen them in action. A friend of mine from the Clearwater days, Reggie Harris, black musician, folk singer, storyteller, during the heart of the George Floyd disruption, was up in upstate New York at a rally. It was a Black Lives Matter rally, and there was a simultaneous MAGA rally, make the world, make America great again. And he and a guy got into a yelling match. But then at a certain point, Randy just stopped and took a breath, and he realized his own emotions were part of what was ramping up the division there. And he just stopped and said, "Hey, my name's Reggie. What's your name?" And it broke things. It didn't solve world peace. It didn't end MAGA. But for the next 20 minutes, they had an actual conversation. And so that difficult conversations laboratory method, people could just Google for that too, I think, which is a lot about yourself and not so much about the other person, can really make a big difference. And it's not what I spent the first 30 years of my life doing, which was storytelling.
And it's interesting, not what scientists are used to doing. Scientists are used to, let me tell you what I know and how smart I am.
Yeah. Now there's a comment from Gary Crothers. I'm going to put it on the screen again. This is something you hear a lot, which is everything we're talking about now is distracting from the fact this is a systemic problem that it's big corporations and government. That he says everything else is daydreaming. I disagree, because politics is a function of people's behavior and attitudes and stuff.
And so that my retort to that is that individual change is system change. And there's a wonderful book that I've read while doing some research for my book called Conversations about Climate Change with the Dalai Lama. And even though it's old now, it's like the conversations took place in 2011, 2012, and in it there's a chapter on individual and system change, and it's not the Dalai Lama, but it's another Buddhist monk who says, this whole idea of the distinction between the individual and the system is such a Western idea, right? The individual is the system and the system is the individuals, and you can't change the system without changing individuals, right? And to me, that gets to the crux of it. Yes, of course, we have to, it's going to take regulation. It's going to take the end of the fossil fuel industry, period, right?
Yeah.
And that's a systemic change. But that's not going to happen as long as every time the price of gas, as long as whenever gas gets scarce, all the individuals out there are clamoring for more gasoline.
Right.
Right. But we've seen this year even is that that all of a sudden, low gas prices to be more politically salient, including Democrats, including people otherwise interested in climate, than actually figuring, hey, gas is more expensive because we're not making it anymore. We're not making fossil fuels anymore. I love it. I consulted with my how long it took the planet to make our fossil fuel reserves. And the answer is about, when you look at the fossil fuel reserves we're tapping out, it's 200 million years. And so that those deposits were there. And we're burning it all in about 200 years. The real cruel irony about the whole, how do we, how soon should we get off fossil fuels is that we only have about 100 years anyway, right? Yeah. And the question, we want to be dealing with an energy transition with a extreme climate change world, or an energy transition ahead of that, right? That prevents it. You may have a little wind noise right now as one of the puffs from Mount Onomano here.
That's okay.
But so to me, it's like, the conversation, how do we get the conversation away from that? It's, let's punish ExxonMobil. Sure, punish ExxonMobil, but they're just doing, corporations are machines, right? You can't punish a corporation, really. It's like trying to punish your lawnmower. It does what it was built to do. And ExxonMobil was built to make money for shareholders, right? And we can change the calculus. We can make it so that you can't make money digging up fossil fuels anymore. But in the process, fossil fuels have to be either scarce or more expensive, or maybe both, right? Because we're not going to move away from fossil fuels as long as it's a cheaper choice for everybody making that choice, whether it's to fly across the country or to drive across town.
Mm-hmm. Well, this has just been a splendid conversation. I love that last point you just made. Well, several of them are just great. And I'll look up the Dalai Lama book. Let's just close out a little bit here before we go. And I just want to make sure I can go check on my wife. For those who are watching or who watch later, I ended up, my wife fell while we were hiking this morning, and she's in the emergency room being tended to. So I'm doing this conversation with Robin Bell and Karl Copeland, who are sailing slowly around the world, or on their way to Tasmania right now. It stopped in Bora Bora, a legendary place. So let's just zoom in one last time on where you are right now, on Bora Bora, French Polynesia. When I was there in the 70s, 1978 and back, one of the key clear tensions there was colonialism. There was a French, he was actually a marine biologist, French guy, was in a restaurant, and I heard him chastising someone. There wasn't enough garlic in the omelet. I'm thinking, And there were kids where the kids had to serve in the French army, and there was a lot of turmoil at that time about this, and that imprint is everywhere too. So what else are you seeing so far in French
Well,
Polynesia that
well,
feels
it's really interesting, and to kind of watch the progression as we go from we started. French Polynesia is huge in terms of how far it spreads across the
yeah
Pacific, right? I mean, from the Marquises to Bora Bora, where we are here, Malpiti, I guess, a little further west, but we're basically gone from one end to the other, and it's several thousand miles of islands,
Like
right?
New York to
It's like
Colorado.
it's like practically the continental United States, and in scope. And in the Marquesas, where we started out, I think there was more of a sense of resurgence of Polynesian culture. I mean, it's true here too. And one thing we saw in village after village, people in our generation would have a French name, would have a Western name,
yeah
right? And they would, right, like,
Colette.
yeah, or
Frida.
Chrétien, right? We
Right.
met on Fatuhiva and served us dinner in his house, right? But the children, right, the people our children's age, would have Polynesian names, right?
yeah.
And the French actually during the colonial.
You broke up a little bit there. Could you say that
Yeah,
again?
yeah, the French actually outlawed the Polynesian language
Yeah.
for a time, and so they couldn't speak it in schools, and so it was almost lost. And now you see the resurgence where now people are much more likely to speak the Polynesian dialect, which is a little difficult because every island has its own dialect, and the language is
Sure.
very different among different island chains. So we started off saying Yorana, which is hello in the Tahiti language, but in Marquesas it's Kaoha, more like the Hawaiian aloha, actually. Uh, but it's really fascinating to see that and to see a real appreciation of kind of Marquesan history and culture coming back.
And also, we've heard sort of the in-your-face, this is not France.
Right.
If you're
Right.
going to think France, please go back.
And,
Right.
and I see kind of an increase in the kind of the Frenchification and the tension increases as you go west and closer to Tahiti, which is really the big city, and also
Yeah.
the tourist. I mean, there's so much. Bora Bora is probably the most heavily touristically developed place we've been, and so you feel more of that separation between the French and the indigenous people here. But
Yeah.
there's a lot of, I mean, there's so many French and Polynesian families. And there's so many Polynesians, as you mentioned, the family you knew that have gone to France. So it's
Yeah.
hard. I do know as a sailor, right? Because before we came here, we read several reports about how the Polynesians are sick and tired of sailors, actually, people coming in yachts, and less
Okay.
true in the Marquesas. But because and I'm not sure the entire, all the deal of Polynesia being independent, but still within the French, rubric, and the gendarmerie are still French here, and they have baguettes still, but it also means that any French citizen, I think any EU citizen, can come and stay as long as they want in Polynesia.
Yeah.
And so there's quite a few French people who buy a sailboat and then just come and live in paradise, or what they think of as paradise,
Yeah.
but bring their first world demands and attitudes with them that may be incompatible. And so a lot of Polynesians complain about, well, French sailors coming and just stealing their fruit, right? And they're so generous. Still, people give us armloads of fruit,
Yeah.
on the smaller islands. You can't, and even here in Bora Bora, we bought like 8 bananas from somebody, and she learned we were on a sailboat, and she said, "Oh, here, take this huge
Rack of
bunch. You might even be able to see it out there hanging from her." That's that kind of generosity, but also that kind of, it's our land still, right? And don't come and
Yeah.
just take it without asking, right?
Yeah. No, it's wonderful. I'm just so glad to connect with you, and maybe we could try one more time on another stop. So where are you going between? When are you leaving French Polynesia, and what's next on your itinerary?
And raved in Jello, but the current plan is to sail for the Cook Island next Saturday, a week from today. From there, we have to decide. A lot depends on whether Tonga is open to sailboats. Currently, it's not. There were rumors it's supposed to open October 1st, We're trying to get to New Zealand by early November. So that is either a tricky passage straight from Cook Islands to New Zealand because the weather gets to be unpredictable over that time frame, or going to Tonga if it's open and waiting for a good weather window, or if we don't want to make the trickier passage, going to Fiji or maybe Western Samoa to wait for better weather. All of those have, advantages and disadvantages. The shortest distance is Tonga to New Zealand, but Tonga may not be open to us.
And then the goal is New Zealand and then Australia by January when my Fulbright starts.
Right. So Australia in December, Tasmania by January.
Well, hopefully you can go to Tonga. For those who might have missed it, one of the world's biggest eruptions in the modern era took place there out of the blue recently, and so they're still recuperating from that economically and every way.
They're really closed because of the COVID situation, and their COVID closing that may or may not be over.
Interesting.
Because the people who came to help after the volcano brought COVID.
Yeah. Yes, a globally connected world.
And there's still a volcanic eruption going on there. There's actually an island growing in the Tonga Island chains right now, a new island which is growing a bit every day.
Well, again, thanks so much for spending some time. Be careful around New Zealand. That's when I joined the sailboat that I spent 17 months on in 1979 in New Zealand. The first leg was across the Tasman to Sydney, and 8 out of the 11 days were insane gales. We blew in a porthole, all kinds of.
News is weather forecasting is better, and we probably wouldn't have sailed in those conditions.
Yeah. Oh, I was going to ask you, do you have a traditional sextant and stuff, or do you rely purely on technology?
Do and so, I've actually used it more actively on this trip just because, when we sailed, there are any number of reasons. GPS navigation, right? Most, there's a risk of a lightning strike in your boat if possible. Everything electronic on the boat fried, but everything else will be fine. Always, tried to keep good enough, and I'm not, not one of those really accomplished lessons, but just a simple sun sight can give you a really accurate latitude every day.
Yeah, that's what I get good at.
Right, down latitude, right place. So yeah. I've been keeping a separate, completely non-electronic, or almost completely non-electronic track on a paper chart with sun sights every day.
We haven't hit any rocks yet with it.
And it's nice to know that with that, which I can check against the GPS, to see how badly off I am. We would have found our way to the right place. And then of course with the Ukraine crisis, it's like and you never know when somebody's going to make an attack on the whole GPS system for some reason, right? So that would be nice backup to have too, if there's for other reasons GPS go down. So now you can't even fly in a plane without a GPS. So they're going to make sure that stays up, I suppose.
Sorry, this is Andy Revkin from the Columbia Climate School, sitting outside the ER in Ellsworth, Maine. My wife is being tended to here after a hiking mishap. Not how I normally do my webcast, but it was just a great opportunity to check in with two globe circling, low carbon pursuing friends, Karl Copeland. Make sure you hunt down his book, Live Sustainably Now, and that's also the website he has, livesustainablynow.com. You can keep track of their sailing adventures on Sailblog, which is pretty cool. Sailblogs.com/member, and then the name of the boat, Mabel Rose, one word. So thanks so much, Karl and Robin Bell from Columbia Climate School, for checking in. Good luck on your adventures going forward around this amazing planet, and maybe we can do another check-in as you periodically as you go forward.
We'd love to do it. We'll probably have good internet again sometime.
I'm sure you will. Take care.
All right.
Okay.
Catch up. Our best to Lisa.
Our best to Lisa.
Thank you.